Welcome, everybody. This is session 6 of Rooting in the Landscape, Sacred Spaces. And as always, I'm just honored to have you here, excited to present this material this evening, and just have found it an amazing process to go through creating these presentations for this format. But before we start and before we dig into our material, let's take a little bit of time to get oriented to what we're about to do. Next slide, please. And as we orient, I want you once again to connect to your altars. Hopefully you're setting them up. If not, you at least have a vision of your altar. And this altar has changed. I've included some objects that I consider sacred, and the 2 bottles are water that came from the wells in Glastonbury, just so I can satisfy that curiosity. And the stones actually are 4 stones that I used as symbols on a journey at Yule time to bring back 4 gifts for this particular year as it was coming up. So I felt that those were very sacred to me. And we'll get on and talk a little bit more about what is sacred, how we connect to that as we progress. But I just figured I'd answer some questions about my altar and what you're seeing in the slide. So as we address our altars and connect with perhaps what we put on them that was sacred, let's also take a moment to put our bundle, our burden bundle, that bundle of worries and thoughts and machinations, those things going through our minds, let's set them on Mother Earth, and she will tend those for us until we're done here and free our mind up so that we can concentrate and experience this session. If your space allows for it, and if you haven't already done so, light your candle and recognize that as you light your candle, you are welcoming in the light. And in this light, we have a sense of connection. We have the sense that we are light. We shine our light forward, and it forms a web that supports us and allows us to open to greater and deeper aspects of ourselves. So now that we've addressed this space, let's step forward into this idea of spiritual space, sacred space. Next slide, please. And here's our meditation slide for this week. And this is in homage of Mount Athos in Greece, which is a seat of the great Orthodox tradition. And it is from that tradition that we've had our model for our meditations. So once again, let's take our seat. You may wish to close your eyes lightly and take a deep breath and settle in. And we're going to begin with the idea of meditating like a mountain. You are now in a place to be. Notice your posture. Your spine is like a smooth stack of coins, erect. Imagine that you are the mountain, that time for you is eternal. Your posture is imperial and commanding. Rest in this position for a few moments. Feel what it is like to have this seat, to hold this posture, to have this view. Ask yourself, what is it to meditate like a mountain? Now, let's orient toward beauty. In this case, perhaps your sacred object is a thing of beauty. It is a gift from nature. We're going to think about beauty and meditate on an object of beauty. What is it like to pull this beauty into yourself, to sense this beauty? Take a moment to connect to this object. Can you notice where you're having thoughts about it? Is it in your head? See if you can pull gently your sensing of that object of beauty into your heart. And extend to your object from your heart, truly sensing the beauty and the light. Ask yourself, what is it like to meditate like this beautiful gift, this sacred object? We've established our seat. We've sensed beauty. Now, let's meditate like the ocean. The ocean is a vast landscape, a place of great cycles and tides. It is the major source of the oxygen we breathe. As we meditate like the ocean, we notice our breath. We breathe deeply into our bellies and slowly exhale. We breathe in, we exhale. Slowly, rhythmically, like the waves of the ocean coming to shore and receding, in and out. Find your pace. Meditate like the ocean. Let's rest here for a few moments. Finally, we meditate like a bird. Birds and other animals often murmur and vocalize in contentment. For those schooled in certain traditions, this vocalization is a prayer, an invocation of the Creator. For us, it is the sound we make that connects us to Mother Earth. Her vibration is always with us. Tone softly on your exhale. Hum gently. Feel the vibration of your vocalization move throughout your body. As you hum and tone, extend your awareness out from your body to encompass your altar, the room you're in, your neighborhood, your city, and the countryside as far as you can. Hold that sense of extension. Rest there for a few moments. Your humming may be almost silent now, completely internal. And when you're ready, you may shift into silence, and we will rest there for a few moments. Slowly, bring yourself back from the birds, the ocean, your object of beauty, the mountain. Stretch, yawn, wiggle your fingers and toes. Open your eyes as we begin to consider today's topic. Next slide, please. This particular quote probably sums up the rest of the discussion in just a few words. If you've been in the vicinity of the sacred, ever brushed against the holy, you retain it more in your bones than in your head. And if you haven't, no description of the experience will ever be satisfactory. What we've been flirting with throughout this whole series is getting to the spiritual side of landscapes. As a review, we've had to deconstruct our approach to landscapes, and we did this through trying to understand our connection to Mother Earth, how we're born to her, how she truly is our mother. We moved through our ways of perceiving spaces and places that we navigate, understanding that we have different streams of information informing us all the time. We moved on to understanding the beginnings, our beginnings, and cosmic stories that tell us how we came to be and how places came to be named and how they influence us. We've looked at the active side of building our world. Who are the architects? How does our world get to be? And we've examined at the very surface the beings in all dimensions with whom we share our world, understanding that we are not really alone. We cohabitate with many orders of beings. And as we've looked at all this, we've worked to grasp the idea of intelligence as order and awareness. And as kind of an overarching approach to this, we've looked to the gifts of story that have provided maps for us into Mother Earth. And so story and myth will continue to inform us as we begin to explore what it is to be sacred and holy. These ideas are tied very closely to the way we talk about our relationship with the supernatural. So as I talk today, we'll be talking about the idea of holy, sacred, supernatural. The language we're probably more comfortable with might even be non-ordinary. So we're talking about a reality that isn't apparent to us in our ordinary sensing system, but very much real as we shift into other ways of perceiving. And it's not that it's not natural. It's a wholly natural way of perceiving, a wholly natural order of being. It just responds to different governing principles. And it's a reality that's very separate and independent of our limited material world. So we're beginning to approach this idea now of what it is to be sacred and what is sacred. And we're going to start with the idea that sacred is a saturation with beingness. That really doesn't suggest much to me when I first found that as an orientation. And I thought, well, okay, so if it's beingness, it has to manifest to us in ways beyond our typical perception. And language comes into play here. Are we talking about something religious or spiritual? And it's probably better to go to the idea of spiritual, because this is where we connect our soul and our consciousness. And so the sacred is what does that for us. It's a different manner of perception. So when we're hooked into the sacred, what we may discover is that we get goosebumps or chills. Many have called it a feeling of terror before the mysterium tremendum. This idea of awe, fascination, and something that we know is sacred is something that we feel we owe respect. And this kind of aligns with this idea of what Daniel Taylor says. You feel it in your bones. Next slide, please. But there are other ways that we can talk about this idea of trembling and terror. Of course, one of the first things that comes up when we talk about experiencing the sacred or holy is that one has fear, or there's a sense of awe and dread. Oftentimes, people talk about a feeling of humility. Included in there is a sense of urgency and energy. There could be blank wonder at the holy other, a fascination with a feeling of longing, or a sense of the sublime. And these are characteristics of our feeling, physical connection to this idea of sacred, holy, supernatural, non-ordinary. So I'm just going to throw it out. Has anyone experienced any of these senses in the presence of something they considered sacred or holy? And if you want to just punch a number in to let me know which one connects, that would be great. Or pitch in with a comment too. All wonder, energy, yeah. 2, 3, 4, and 5, yeah. Humility, 3, 4, 5. Great, thank you so much. The one I seem to focus on, all of the above, terrific. The one I seem to focus on many times is this feeling of longing. In so many traditions, the goal, the object of engaging with the tradition, be it a very native tradition like shamanism or perhaps a mystery school tradition, is some kind of reconnection with that which we think of as divine or holy. And here again, our language is a little tricky. So when we're talking about the divine, we might be talking about the creator. We might be talking about God. We might be talking about the great mystery. And these words are somewhat interchangeable. The point is, we're trying to, I believe, reconnect with that part reflected within us with the divine. So we have this piece within us, and we seek that union. We're seeking a union. And when we seek that union, oftentimes our emotions kick in. So we have those actual moments when, oh my gosh, I'm in the presence of something really, really important here, and the tears flow. We often talk about shamanism as the path of tears, or, laughter is also a way that we can react to the sacred and holy. Next slide, please. So once we understand through our physical reaction or our sense within ourselves that we've come in contact with the divine, with God, with the mystery, however you choose to characterize it, there are a lot of different levels at which we can experience that contact. And so I'm going to talk through these very briefly, and I'm going to ask you where and when perhaps you've had these levels of contact. So the first one is confirming. And this for a person is when, for example, you find yourself in the presence of something you consider sacred or holy, and you are acutely aware that you are in the presence of something really important. You know that this is mystery. The second level is responsive. This is when you are in that position of knowing you're in the presence of something sacred, holy, divine, supernatural, non-ordinary, and you know that it is aware of you as well. The third level is the ecstatic. This is a very intimate, meaning close, personal, private sometimes, and effective contact with the divine. Your mood, your feeling, your attitude. And I think it was only right and appropriate that when Mircea Eliade wrote his book, Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, that the word ecstasy was in the title, because the shaman, as he portrays the shaman, actually has this very intimate, effective contact with the divine, which leads to effective reactions. So this is the piece where there is that emotional kick in that results. The fourth one is revelational, and this is where the divine actually gives you information and or you become an agent of the divine. So many prophets fall into this particular category. Prophets who have an experience of something superordinary, non-ordinary, and they come or return from that experience and present this material into the world in some way, either through let's do this now, let's do that now, or by their actions. They've been changed, and it's almost as if they have a mission. So does anybody have any sense of this? Where might you find a confirming sense of presence or sacredness? And perhaps as you think about that, at the Grand Canyon. And the responsive one? Okay. And Barbara, where have you found the responsive piece? In a church, yeah, absolutely. Yep. So there are places that can be human created as well as very natural places like the Grand Canyon where we can have the experience of something important happening. Great, San. Thank you. Meditation, journeying certain landscapes. Absolutely. Thank you. So as human beings, there are times when we feel these tugs and we want to discover more meaning in our lives. There's this call or yearning to move into a space. And we look for a place where we have room to feel more than the routine of our existence. And so we've touched upon some of this in earlier sessions when we talked about heterogeneous space. That's where the diversity flourishes and there are gaps in our perception, because it's those gaps in our perception where we can find some of the sacred. And when we connect with that, we feel that the world is made sacred. And we know that infinite possibilities exist. Next slide, please. So let's look at some insights into the idea of holy or sacred places. And again, I'm reverting to Mircea Eliade because he provides us with a couple of ideas that give us some ways to pursue this. And the first one is Imago Mundi, and the second is Axis Mundi. So here we have this little diagram talking about the world of the gods. Humans recognize that there is the world of man, there is the world of the supernatural, and there's a kind of a meeting of these two opposites that we're compelled to balance, somehow to reconcile the profane and the sacred. And we touched upon this a little bit when we looked at the instrumental and spiritual views when we discussed cohabitance. The instrumental view certainly tells us that here we have the earth, we're supposed to use it, let's dig her up and just focus on its material aspects. Balanced against that is the spiritual view, which says, yes, we have needs, but we have needs beyond the material. We have psychological needs and sociological needs, and they can only be handled when we view the world as inspirited. And so what man has tried to do for ages is to attempt to make contact between this idea of the world of the gods and the world of humans. And one of the ways that Eliade says we have tried to do this, and we have some evidence of that through our myths and our stories, is that we try to imitate the gods. And as we try to imitate the gods, imitatio Dei, we attempt to bring forth that image of their world into our world. We touched a little bit about that when we emphasized that certain aspects at certain periods of time of city development reflected deeper connections. So in many early cities, it was a spiritual center that was the focus of the city, that was the center of the city. And later it changed. We had political centers and banking centers. So we've moved from the spiritual view to an instrumental view. As we begin to manifest this imitation of the gods in our world, we end up with objects, places, and things that are called hierophanies. And that simply means it's the manifestation of the sacred. And it's the interruption of the profane by the sacred. And again, we're going back to this idea of interruption of same space. Homogeneous space without an interruption doesn't hold the sacred. But when you have interruptions and changes, that's where you can find the gap to find the sacred. Next slide, please. So here we have this idea of bringing forth the ideas and the world of the gods to us. And we notice that there are particular spaces or places in which this seems to have happened more consistently. As we examine this, we recognize that there are characteristics of places that we call sacred. And the two important characteristics of sacred space are, first, that there has been communication with the supernatural, the holy, the deity, however you construe that. It's occurred there. And that communication with the supernatural is still possible along the axis mundi. Next slide, please. The axis mundi is the axis of the world. For those who do journey work and understand the way of the shaman, there is an axis that connects all the worlds, and we find that represented in many ways. And it becomes the pinpoint conduit to the center of the world. And as the pinpoint conduit to the center of the world, it's the pipeline through which the other world conveys information, makes contact, makes connection. It's how we are connected to the sacred, the holy, the deity, creator, the mystery. There are many representations, actually in architecture, that suggest to us this axis mundi. The one we're probably most familiar with is the steeple of a church. It rises up from the ground to the sky, to the cosmos, and is considered a pipeline from the deity to earth. A tree, the world tree, is often considered the axis mundi. The minaret, columns, the pagoda. These are all considered tubes, conduits between the sacred and the profane, the world of the gods and our world. And there are some more traditional examples of this. We can see them in the poles in certain habitations of the Buryat, excuse me, where, for example, they put a post in the ground. Oftentimes it's a birch tree, and it is the conduit. It is the antenna that brings the sacred to the profane. We see that in doorposts of the Kwakiuts, and the Mapuche actually build a post that has steps in it that they will use to climb. These are natives to Chile. It will climb to make an ascent, to go up the axis to bring information down to ordinary reality, from the sacred to the profane. So, next slide, please. Here's this beautiful Irish riddle talking about where is the center of the world. It's right between your own 2 feet. And what this really begins to suggest to us that we ourselves can be our own axis mundi. We can within ourselves have that conduit between the sacred and the profane. We are capable of pulling in and connecting, making that connection between that spark of divinity that's within us with the divinity that is in the cosmos. Next slide, please. So why do we need sacred space? Isn't our material world good enough for us? Why do we need it? Again, we as humans are inspirited beings and have recognized that inspirited quality. And in order to express ourselves fully, have a point of orientation where we know that there is a possibility to have contact between ourselves and the supernatural. We need to have an access or a way into the cosmos. And also, we are still in the process of reproducing the work of the gods to become like the gods. And I like this idea that I'm still toying with. When I read about this, it suggested to me that we as humans are constantly working at some level to improve. And for a long time, it has circled around this idea of purity. What's pure, what's not pure? How are we clean? How are we unclean? We have so many stories that tell us of a fall from grace. And it's, again, I think it's about this idea of reconnecting that which we know is true within ourselves. And one of the only ways we can do it is through contact. It's like if we go to sacred places, the goodness of the place, the sacred quality of the place, the holiness of the place can rub off on us, and then we can make contact. A lot of this, I think, just goes right back to that sense of longing, that true sense of longing. What's fascinating is that the idea of sacred can exist on many different scales. And one of the examples that comes from architectural space comes just within perhaps the decoration of a room. For example, if you go into a Catholic hospital, you will find a crucifix on the wall. Suddenly, having that symbol on the wall has created sacred space. For many people who follow Judaism, the mezuzah on the doorpost somehow creates sacred space. Where else have you found any of that? Does anybody have any ideas about where something symbolic may have appeared to give a sense of sacred space? It doesn't have to be something visual either. Yeah, light streaming through clouds absolutely gives a sense of sacred quality. Dana and I, when we're driving down the street, we often call those God rays. I think in terms of humanly created things, a cross of Bridget posted over a door helps to give a sense of sacred space. I think incense, if somebody lights incense, there's an immediate sense associated with scent that creates a sense of the sacred. We use these cues, I think, to help us shift into that way of perceiving the world. Imagery and statues, absolutely. The icons, totally. These are all ways that we work to introduce the sacred into space and place. Next slide, please. So how do places become sacred? Well, typically it's because the place is associated with a legendary or historical event. And that event had to do with the communication from the supernatural. Oftentimes, places are associated with the lives of holy people. And sometimes a place becomes sacred when another tradition has established a spot there, and it's almost like a layering of tradition upon tradition. So when I think about the third suggestion about how a place becomes sacred, I recall that many Christian sites in the United Kingdom were once associated with earlier native traditions, local faiths. And I can't remember the name of the Pope, but he actually said to go in and build upon those places in order to take advantage of the fact that they were sacred places and to shift the allegiance from one tradition to another. And while the names changed, I think it was fascinating that the power and energy of the place didn't change. So it almost didn't matter who you called or what you called it the space. It was still a sacred space. So we could say that the sacred tends to be the very place that we walk. We as sacred beings, because we have that divinity within us, carry that with us, and goes back to that whole Irish riddle that the center of the world is between our own 2 feet. Yet again, we still have the longing to go someplace where we can make these deeper connections, where we can know for sure that we can have contact, face-to-face contact, where our souls can find the nectar that soothes this longing. And for many people, this is the pilgrim's journey. Next slide, please. So who's the pilgrim? We're not talking Thanksgiving here. We're not talking turkey. We're talking a person who travels to a sacred place for religious reasons. And while the pilgrims who came to this country were traveling for religious reasons, I don't think they were looking at coming here as coming to a sacred place. And they already had certain religious freedoms in Holland, but they wanted to retain their English heritage, so that's why they came here. But there is the religious person or spiritual person who travels to a sacred place for religious reasons. So why do they do that? Once again, it's to imitate the gods. Also, it's to be close to the axis mundi, or that conduit, that place where the contact is said to have happened. Because for them, as pilgrims, there's the possibility for personal contact, and from that personal contact, there's the possibility that they can have insights and growth. And so there are pilgrims around the world that flock to many different places to follow in the steps of great leaders or saviors. Some go to Jerusalem to pray at the Western Wall. Others do this great circuit from Mecca to the plain of Arafat to Mina and back to Mecca. Others visit Galilee. Others go to seek a homeland where ancestral roots were deep, and they want to get beyond a sense of colonialism and oppression back to deep, deep roots. So there are pathways of saints and mystics and ancestors and heroes, and time gets altered or skewed when the pilgrim is on these paths. The past and present can blur, and the pilgrim literally begins to walk in the footsteps of a revered person. And with that reverence that comes with that, there's this eternal quality of now, and communication can be established with the mystery. And when that happens, just for that moment, or maybe a bit longer, there's a sense of clarity, balance, and wonder that truly influences a person's life from that point forward. Unfortunately, for most of us, we get sidetracked and our material enchantments begin to lure us down dead ends. But we can, if we hang on to the sense that we are pilgrims on a journey, we can hold on to that sense of clarity, balance, and wonder. Next slide, please. So just for a moment, we are going to be pilgrims. I'm going to ask you to take a deep breath and settle into the darkness behind your closed eyes. We're going to take another walk today, and this time we are going to walk as a pilgrim. The way you walk today is part of the path around the island of Shikoku in Japan. This is the smallest of the Japanese islands and is the most pristine. You've heard tales of the monk Kukai, also known as Kobo Dosha Daishi, and he visited 88 sacred sites along this path, which took him through forests, by the ocean, into cities and villages, and partly into the mountains. You have decided to follow his trail to gain some understanding of what it is that is sacred. From behind your closed eyes, you begin to see some lightness, and you look down to find yourself wearing the white shirt of the pilgrim. Around your neck is a narrow purple scarf. Upon your head is a conical Asian hat, and in your right hand you have a staff. The staff is a physical representation of Kukai who walks with you on this journey. You will treat this staff with respect, washing its feet at day's end and carefully placing it down at each break so that Kukai can also rest. You step forward in anticipation and walk briskly along the path. The well-worn trail takes you into the mountains. You meet other pilgrims along the way. There are many here who walk along the 970-mile route. You nod and smile. Warmth is returned to you from many faces. All seek to imitate Kukai and to find an open channel to communicate with the divine. The ground beneath your feet rises, and you move away from others on the trail. Sensitive to the idea of thresholds and liminal space, you feel subtle shifts in the atmosphere. The weather has not changed, but you sense movement around you. There are light beings here, the kami, and you know that you and your staff have company. As the trail winds its way through forested land, it becomes more difficult, steeper. You look to your staff upon which are carved the Japanese characters for "We two pilgrims together." You are heartened to know that Kukai is assisting you. You touch the bag slung from your shoulder, conscious of the ofuda, or calling cards you carry, the photos of loved ones for whom you pray, and the objects representing your special intentions. All these will be left along the way at various temples, where you hope to communicate with the gods and saints and receive blessings. Knowing that you are on a special mission, your resolve is strengthened. Clouds slip across the sky, thickening, and the day becomes overcast. It is difficult to track time without sight of the sun, and you slip into a reverie about Kukai. You recall his great accomplishments as a poet, an artist, the founder of the Shingon school of Buddhism. You recall his posthumous honorific, Kobodaishi, or Grand Master. Walking in his footsteps, you begin to feel more and more of the eternal nowness and wonder that the Master experienced as he walked this trail too. You round a bend and are startled by stubbing your toe upon a stone. Snapped out of your reverie, you realize that you have strayed from the path. or at least you think you've done so. You look around and there are no other pilgrims in sight. You stand alone, the fragrance of the pines hanging in the damp air, with only your staff and the sense of the kami around you. You wonder, when did I leave the trail? How far is the temple? You feel a tightness in your throat. Taking a deep breath, you work to settle rising anxiety. What ifs jump about in your mind as you concentrate on remaining calm. You place your hand on your heart and begin to count and breathe. Slowly, the tightness leaves your throat. Your eyes close lightly and you feel relaxed. Just as this sensation seeps into your toes, you feel a slight nudge on your knees. You open your eyes to find a dog smiling up at you. You smile back and bend to pet the dog, feeling a different kind of relief flooding your awareness. The dog moves off a short distance and turns, expecting you to follow. Thinking perhaps the dog has an owner who may help you find your way, you shrug and follow. The dog continues to move ahead, turns to make sure you follow, then races on. The two of you make your way up a narrow track, and suddenly you find yourself rejoining the main way. Off in the distance you spot the top of the toe, the pagoda, that is a landmark for the pilgrims approaching the temple. You smile in relief and gratitude. You bend to pet the dog and thank it for its help, but it's disappeared. Wishing the dog well, you approach the goal with lightened steps. It's not yet night, so you approach the temple, ready to engage in the ritual required of the pilgrim. You pass through the gate, acutely aware of crossing a threshold. You slowly pass under the overhead lintel and take 5 breaths to appreciate that you have entered the temple compound. You offer yen to the Deva kings guarding the gate and a bit of rice to ensure that your prayers will be answered. Ahead of you are the Ishidan, stone steps you must climb. There are 108 of these steps, corresponding to the worldly desires from Buddhist teachings. Mindfully you climb these steps, appreciating the symbolic meaning. You are eliminating worldly desires. The effort in climbing the steps reminds you of the effort needed in daily life. You catch your breath at the top of the stairs before approaching the ablution basin. A natural spring fills this stone basin through a bamboo pipe. Here you contemplate your imminent meeting with the presence of the holy and sacred. Through the medium of water, you wash your hands and gargle to purify your body and soul. Symbolically cleansed, you move to the belfry, where you strike a large metal bell with a log, both suspended in a pavilion. This communicates your arrival to the various deities housed here and Kobodaishi. 2 more preparatory steps remain. You move to the incense burner and light incense. The scent rises and creates a pathway for communication with the deities and the dead. You walk to the candle receptacle. You light candles within this orange receptacle to venerate and give light to the Buddha, Kobodaishi, and the souls of the dead. Now you are ready. Cleansed and prepared, you make your way to the Hondo, the main hall of the temple compound. It houses the chief deity of the temple. Chanting washes over you as you step onto the porch that surrounds the building. The Okyo, part of the law of Buddha, as well as words dedicated to Kobodaishi, rise and fall in steady cadence to the clapping of 2 sticks, which regulate the pace. No one enters the main hall. A grill covers the entrance, and you can only peer into the dark recesses, where the statues of the deity are placed. It is here you leave the tokens from your bag. The ofuda, or calling card, which gives your name, address, date, age, and prayers. The photos, and the objects that represent your intentions. All of these are a means for the Buddha to know you and the others for whom you travel. You leave a monetary offering. You find that your body has begun to move in rhythm with the chant, and you are in a slightly altered state of awareness. Somewhere within, you sense it is time to move onward. You breathe deeply and step away from the hondo. Your next destination within the compound is the Daishido. This is the hall in which you will communicate with Kobodaishi. To approach this hall, you repeat the lighting of incense and the lighting of the candles. Chanting surrounds you here as you offer special prayers, and once again leave the ofuda, tokens for others, and a monetary offering. As you scan the hall, you see evidence of the miraculous. Crutches, casts, and braces line the walls, evidence of blessings received and cures. Once again, you pull yourself away from the chanting and make your way to the final building you will visit atop the stairs. It is the priest's residence, where you will get a stamp indicating that you've made a stop at this temple on your pilgrimage around Shikoku. This particular house also houses pilgrims for the night. Since night is falling, you decide to remain here before going on to the next temple on the circuit. This night, as you lay to rest and gently set your staff down so that Kobodaishi may also rest, you overhear pilgrims in the next compartment telling stories of Kukai's journeys. Once, on a journey deep in the mountains, Kukai and a group of monks got lost. To encourage them, Kukai suggested reciting the mantra for the Buddha. While doing so, 2 dogs appeared and barked, as if asking the monks to follow them. Following the dogs, they soon found their way. Mysteriously, the dogs were gone. Kukai said that they were bodhisattvas in the form of dogs. Drifting into sleep, you smile and recall the dog who assisted you in finding your way. You offer a prayer of gratitude for the blessing of the bodhisattvas and melt into sleep knowing that on the morrow you will descend the 108 steps, pass out under the gate, and rejoin the path of the pilgrim. Slowly bring yourself back to this space and time. Stretch, yawn, open your eyes. Hopefully what you noticed on this imagined pilgrim's walk was a shift into a spiritual view. You were able to look at and experience symbolic behavior confined in sacred space. Yet this sacred space, while humanly created, was situated in particular places because those very places were imbued with characteristics. Be it material or non-ordinary, these characteristics triggered the receptors and shouted, "Sacred." So when we shift into this kind of view, the spiritual view of the earth, we unlock a lot of possibilities for greater relationship to the land. Many people who've walked this earth before us have demonstrated the many forms this spiritual relationship can take. And there have been those who've slept on graves to become shaman. There have been those who've been buried in the earth as part of an initiatory sequence of ceremonies. Many celebrate their transformation from one state to another through marrying land, legitimizing rule. We've seen that in many ways, the land, Mother Earth, becomes the teacher, the mother, and the wife. And this is a far cry from looking to the earth simply as a resource to be exploited or sold to the highest bidder. Many of us come from Abrahamic traditions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. For the most part, these are very human-centered faiths, putting man ahead of all else. Nature is very secondary. Yet, there are seeds found within each of these traditions that bring the sacred to the earth. For the Christian, when Jesus became flesh and participated in earthly life, he tacitly made all of earth sacred. In Islam, there's a concept of Khalifa Allah from the Quran, which makes humans vice regents of Allah, suggesting that humans have responsibility to nature. That is, they must see and honor their relationship with it. And in Judaism, there are covenantal aspects of the tradition that create a contract between humans and creation. A contract, much like a marriage contract, it has duties and obligations. So there are just many, many ways that there are seeds for us to find the sacred here on our great Mother Earth. Next slide, please. And so there are questions for each of us to consider as we do our own self-examination, as we begin to delve into how these things are meant to be for us. So how do we recognize sacred space? How must we approach it? How are we meant to act in it or with it? These are really important questions. And as the pilgrim, we've had a chance to recognize that there is a sense of separation, but we can follow this idea of separation from ordinary life by taking moments from our daily life here to separate ourselves, to find the gaps. And this brings us full circle. To find the gap, to recognize the sacred, it comes in recognizing the language of our own bodies. Not only do we sense the mystery as we approach it with accompanying chills and lightheadedness, but we can also find it with our pain. Sometimes there's sacrifice as we draw near to the sacred. And whether it's a return to something once dropped along the way or a fresh encounter, it always takes work to reframe our attitudes. And we're called to become something new, something bigger, perhaps even something better, when we take time to appreciate and recognize this point of interface between ourselves and what is sacred. So before we go on, I don't know if anybody has any comments about this idea of sacred space. If anything's been made more clear, or if you have more questions, a lot of times we don't actually think about what it is to be sacred or take time to appreciate it in particular ways. Great. Saging is a way to make sacred space. Absolutely. And I think that too connects us with the idea of purity, because saging is meant to also be a way of cleansing. And that harkens back to that last characteristic, in that we need sacred space as a connection or an inroads to purity. Well, great. I think we'll just move on to the next slide, please. So we're beginning to wrap up here. And the first thing, oh, there's Sand. I'm sorry, Sand. I don't want to jump ahead without you. Maintaining consciousness about the sacred all around me is what I want most to focus on. Oh, a native flute. Brilliant sound making sacred space. We just had that essence there too in our exercise. The gong of the bell, the chanting, the sticks keeping time. all of that contributing to making sacred space. Beautiful. Thank you. First of all, get back to what I was saying is that I'm very grateful that all of you participated in this program. If it wasn't for you and Wendy, of course, thank you, Wendy, this series would not be. And it wasn't the simple project that Wendy and I had envisioned at the beginning. We figured that, okay, we can take a chapter and make it work. And it didn't flow well in a reiteration of the book. And I think it was more like writing another book. But the point I'm making about that is there's a lot of material here in your worksheets and in the programs that didn't make it in the book. Some of them were just footnotes. Some of them were entirely new concepts. So I want to encourage you to take your worksheets, use them, revisit them, and see if you get further insights. Sometimes circling back on a concept often opens up something new. And if you're trying to match up this program directly with the book, good luck. It probably won't happen. But they all complement each other very well, I think. I think my biggest hope in all of this is probably an answer or is a flash that tags on to what Sand is saying, is that perhaps through some of these techniques and exercises and questions, you can use them to further your understanding of sacred space, to further your relationship with Mother Earth. As you do that, you'll have different techniques, different ways to maybe frame what's happening, so that when you're out on a walk, perhaps you can recognize the information that streams into you along a particular channel. Maybe you'll recognize architectural space. Maybe you'll have a sense of, oh, this is cognitive space where I'm thinking. This is somatic space. Maybe you will notice a shift in how you feel when you cross a threshold. And maybe you'll have a different sense of something. And maybe you'll even begin to think of yourself as a pilgrim, walking the earth with the center of the world between your 2 feet as you continue to walk. Another hope I have for you is that you can use the tool of heart math and the quick cohesion technique that Wendy shared with us to facilitate some of this connection with the earth, to build the rapport with cohabitants and begin to appreciate things in a different way that maybe hadn't crossed your radar before. I will keep you in the loop as developments happen for further exploration. And I just wanted to share with you in this slide that this exploration continues to grow and develop, and I'd like to share it with you, should you like to pursue that as well. If you look at the curve of index cards, those were my prototype deck of cards, because the next piece of this work for me is going to the individual landscapes and delving into their meaning and significance to me personally, and as it would be to you personally. And so I actually used photographs from the web and designed my little cards with headings and whatnot. But I felt they needed to have something that showed greater respect. And so I've had TerraSigns cards printed blank so that you can actually draw what's right for you. And I'm showing you there my temperate deciduous forest. And around it, it just says, if you would know strength and protection, welcome the company of trees. I'm trying to read through my writing there. That is what it means to me in the temperate deciduous forest. So that potential is there for you to continue to explore, and I'll keep you in the loop about those possibilities. And you don't have to be an artist, because you can also put these cards through a computer printer and pull images of any kind, yours, photos, onto them. And Wendy, I don't know if there's something that you would like to add at this point before we do our closing meditation?
I just want to thank everyone for participating. And Shana, thank you for all of the amazing work you've done on this program. You've really shown. It's really been great. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Right. So as we close, let's just take a moment to relax and focus on our altars once again. There's a cloth there that provides a base that defines a space that you can occupy anytime you need to feel calm and centered. There's an object of beauty that ties you perhaps to Mother Nature, or to something sacred, to Mother Earth. And there is a candle there which represents your inner heart light that's part of a vast web of consciousness that extends in all directions and into all dimensions. Take a moment to breathe and connect to the ocean, another metaphor for our participation in a vast ground of being. Know that what is part of you is also part of the ocean. Your very cellular makeup and your breath are all reflections of that great body of water that gives our mother her portrait in space. She is our pale blue dot, swirling through the cosmos, holding us as her children, and sharing with us her awareness and nurturing. Feel the power in the great systems of which we are a part, power that flows to us as energy and intelligence. It is up to us how we approach and use that power. It is up to each of us to make wise choices as we step out into the world and interact with all the great forces of nature and life. Working with the land and landscapes is an avenue to discover and understand our multidimensionality. It is a doorway to expanding and developing our consciousness. As we do this, we serve the world, our Mother Earth, and all our relations, the stones, the plants, the animals, each other, and our typically unseen cohabitants. Our hearts can grow, and we can find the passion and courage to stand in our loving authenticity and be. Next slide. So touch the earth, light your inner fire, and shine. And thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for taking the time and sharing your energy to be part of this program.
I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, Shane, okay?
Great. Thank you.